بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. We reach hadith number 44, باب اتباع الجنائز من الإيمان. This chapter is called following a janaza is part of Iman. So we know that in Islam it is an obligation that if a person passes away, a Muslim passes away, that we perform the rituals of burial, which include the washing of the body, the covering of the body with shrouds, and the burial of the body, as well as the janaza, where we offer salah. And there are some sunan, like trying to, or reminding the one as they are passing away to say La ilaha illallah. If they pass away, to close their eyes, shut their mouth. Sometimes when a person passes away, especially if they're in a lot of pain, their mouths are open trying to gasp for air. Not to paint a vivid image in your mind, but to close their mouth and whatnot. And this is part of Iman. Right? We see this as an element of Iman and part of dignifying the human being. This new approach of cremation that's becoming more utilized in the West is not part of Islam, nor is it allowed. It is not allowed to cremate a Muslim. Some people do this to just avoid all the costs. Or sometimes, unfortunately, you'll have a Muslim man married to a non-Muslim lady who, won't, either he didn't inform her, I need to be buried this way, or she just didn't care. And so the body's cremated, unfortunately. And laws don't really help in this regard. How a person is buried tends to be given to the choice of the closest kin or next in kin. So do be careful of this. If there's anybody listening to this who, let's say, is a revert, and their closest of kin are non-Muslims, then I know our mortuaries, they have this card where it says that I am a Muslim, I must be buried in accordance to Islamic rituals, and they have their name, signature on it, they keep it in their wallet. Now this becomes, as far as I've understood, this becomes a type of a will. So the individual has determined that the law needs to, and by law it needs to be respected. So we encourage people to do that. I think we have cards somewhere you can ask at the front desk, but do have that, or if you know somebody who's in a situation like that, to tell them that this option is available, and that technically it's an obligation. But Muslims are buried in a very particular way, and that is to dignify the human being and also to indicate that they are believers. Also, part of that is that a believer must be buried in a Muslim cemetery. I know in our SoCal area, it's becoming increasingly difficult and costly. But we as a community need to come together to make sure that there are graves available within Muslim graveyards that is clearly marked. So the Muslim community needs to come together and make sure that we have ample graves available and at a reasonable cost. Now they're going more into the desert. I'm just babbling on now. Anyway, no need to go into that detail. So the Prophet, or عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من اتبع جنازة مسلم إيمانا واحتسابا وكان معه حتى يصلي عليها ويفرغ من دفنها فإنه يرجع من الأجر بقراطين كل قراط مثل أحد ومن صلى عليها ثم رجع قبل أن تدفن فإنه يرجع بقراط. So here the Prophet ﷺ says, whoever follows the janazah of a Muslim in Iman and hoping for the reward. Again, there's an element of Iman here, and that is this believer has a right over me. So burying a Muslim is a part of Iman in that, first of all, that person is a Muslim, right? And I have to honor that fact. Also, a Muslim has a right over their fellow Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ says, for every Muslim is 6 rights over their fellow Muslims, and one of them is that if they are buried, if they pass away, they are properly buried. So that's part of our Iman. We believe this. We believe that we're accountable for that. Now, it doesn't mean every single Muslim has to be involved in that process, but the community as a whole and in general needs to be involved in that process. So there's that element of iman, plus it's a reminder for the individual. Right? The Prophet ﷺ says, أَكْثِرُوا مِنْ هَذِمِ اللَّذَّاتِ frequently remember death. It's part of healthy iman. It's actually part of healthy well-being from a psychological side, point of view, even from an emotional point of view. Death is incredibly important to a person's life, ironically, but it is. Okay. So there's the element of iman and there's the element of ihtisab, hoping for the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet then expands on the reward aspect. And he says that if somebody prays the janazah and goes with the burial and buries the individual, then they will return from the burial having gained 2 qirat of reward. Here the Prophet ﷺ defines a qirat as the size of Uhud. Now we've all seen Uhud, right? Uhud is a pretty large mountain, right? It's not small. I like to compare it to the Saddleback Mountain over here by us. It's pretty similar in size. Maybe this is bigger, but in terms of just the mountain itself, the peak, it looks and seems pretty similar to Uhud. So you get 2 rewards of that, 2 times that. That's if you pray janazah and you go to the burial and participate in that process. Now the word qirat actually is the same word as carat in the English language, but carat in the jewelry definition. So they say 24 carats of gold.
These carats are really small.
Right? No, I'm just saying linguistically, qirat in the Arabic language is 1/24th of a portion of something. Just like gold has 24 carats, as far as I'm aware, right? So carat is actually taken from the word qirat and has the same meaning. But here it's defined as the size of Uhud. But if somebody prays the janazah but doesn't participate in the burial, they return with 1 qirat. So there's still a lot of reward. Now, how much time does it take to pray janazah prayer? It's literally 2 minutes. 2 minutes. 3 minutes, right? And you get this amount of reward for 3 minutes of your time. And so many people, when there's an opportunity to pray janazah, they just leave. They don't say, I got to get to work. I got to go. I want to beat traffic and whatnot. It's 3 minutes. And you see this so much in Mecca and Medina. Because almost every single salah in Mecca and Medina, there's a janazah prayer. And you see so many people just leave. Man, how much reward is just from praying janazah when we do our umrah? It's tremendous. You're there anyway, right? But even if you're a resident of the place, you live there, and you have business, you have things to do, you have to go back to work and whatnot, it's still 3 minutes. It's not going to delay anything, really. Also here, when we go to Garden Grove or we go whatever, and there's a janazah prayer, I mean, if you know that there's a janazah prayer going to be offered, you should make an effort to go and pray just to get that reward. It's so tremendous and it's so big. باب خوف المؤمن من أن يحبط عمله وهو لا يشعر. This is the chapter of a believer fears that their deeds will be nullified without knowing. So in Islam, in the Quran, I should say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Hujurat that أن تحبط أعمالكم وأنتم لا تشعرون. O believers, don't put yourself before the Prophet. Don't speak over the Prophet ﷺ. Perhaps your deeds will be nullified, your hasanat will be erased without you even knowing. I mean, imagine. Just sit with yourself right now. Think for a moment. However many years you have behind you, right? 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years behind you. Imagine, what you hope that you have accumulated in good deeds, right? Imagine all of that being erased in a moment and you have no idea.
What does it mean?
It's gone.
Don't talk over.
When the Prophet is speaking, Don't speak like louder than him. Yeah.
The pitch, like.
Stay with me in the moment. Imagine all your deeds just gone because you did something and you have no idea this is the consequences. I mean, say and think, wait a minute, maybe I have actually done something that has nullified my deeds. Is that possible? Well, it's very possible. It's very possible. And you have no idea. وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَشْعُرُونَ. You have no idea. So this is serious. And this should cause an amount of fear in the heart of the believer. But this is healthy fear. This isn't unhealthy fear, it's healthy fear. Right? It is part of Iman. Why? Because you care about hasanat. You care about success. You care about the afterlife. You care about reaching paradise. That is part of Iman. And so doing something that can actually nullify all of that and put you in a very bad situation in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something that draws concern. It's quite scary. So, a believer is very conscious and very cognizant over this reality, how vulnerable they actually are. That their actions aren't simply, no, it happened, whatever, who cares? I did it, I don't regret anything. Let me just keep going forward. No. You can lose everything in a moment, and you have no idea. Right? Here you have two hadith. One, عن عبد الله بن مسعود رضي الله تعالى عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال سباب المسلم فسوق وقتاله كفر. Using vulgar language to insult a believer or a Muslim is an act of fisq. It's an act of clear disobedience. And fighting them is an act of kufr. Fighting a believer, like physical altercation, is an act of kufr. But here, kufr, it doesn't mean they are literally taken out of the fold of Islam. Rather, they are behaving like kuffar. Here, the Prophet ﷺ is creating a mindset. It is not the behavior of a believer to fight another believer. That's not what we do. Rather, it's the kuffar, it's the disbelievers who behave this way. That's not us. Today, it's the opposite. Right? It's the opposite. MashaAllah, the Western world, between each other, are at peace with each other, they agree with each other. I know politics is politics, right? But in terms of societies and whatnot, they tend to get along. I know things are getting worse, unfortunately, or maybe we're just in difficult times, and so people aren't on their best behaviors. But in the Muslim world, ooh, it's so bad. It's terrible. وَإِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Now, what's interesting, or before that, so a believer needs to be very cognizant that my words to insult a fellow Muslim is a major sin. It's not minor. It's not just, I defended myself and I'm gonna go and tell him off. No, this is an act of fisq. Right? It's not just a sin. It's not just a dhanb. It's a fisq. Right? It's a clear disobedience, clearly going against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fighting a fellow believer. How many Muslims are at odds with each other? Brother, sister, parent, child, cousins, neighbors. They're at war with each other. Right? This isn't the akhlaq of the believers. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. Right? Believers are siblings of one another. And it is our role to وَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ. Right? To reconcile between believers. But the question here is, what does this hadith have to do with the chapter? Remember, the title of the chapter is fear. A believer has fear of their deeds being nullified, being erased, without them knowing. So there's nothing in this hadith that indicates that. And my response to that is that Al-Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala is actually connecting this hadith to the Surah Al-Hujurat, in which the verse that this chapter is titled after is found. So in the beginning of Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't put yourself before the Prophet, don't raise your voice over the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Doing these things might cause your deeds to be nullified without you knowing. That's the beginning of the surah. And then the rest of the surah, which is about 2 more pages, discusses when Muslims are in combat with each other. It says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا يَسْخَرْ قَوْمٌ مِّن قَوْمٍ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُونُوا خَيْرًا مِّنْهُمْ, right? وَلَا تَلْمِزُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَلَا تَنَابَزُوا بِالْأَلْقَابِ. it talks about how Muslims behave in terms of their words and talking to other people. It says, don't look down, don't make fun of people. Don't use stereotypical terminology, again, to put other people down. Don't irritate each other with your words. So here the hadith is sibab al-Muslim fusuq. Right? Using vulgar language to insult a fellow Muslim is an act of fisq. This is also mentioned in Surah Al-Hujurat, which is also mentioning, hey, your deeds could be nullified. So it says, though Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, he understood from this hadith, as well as the surah, that all of these behaviors that are laid out in Surah Al-Hujurat, which Allah is telling us not to do, all of these can be reasons for an action or a person's deeds to be nullified. Right? So Allah talks about how we use our language and not to use inappropriate language with each other. Also, Allah talks about, as I mentioned, believers in combat with each other. Right? وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. When believers are fighting each other, reconcile between them. Allah Ta'ala, this is how I kind of connected the dots here. The second hadith, عن عبادة بن الصامت رضي الله تعالى عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم خرج يخبر بليلة القدر فتلاحى رجلان من المسلمين فقال إني خرجت لأخبركم بليلة القدر وإنه تلاحى فلان وفلان فرفعت وعسى أن يكون خيرا لكم التمسوها في السبع والتسع والخمس. In this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, is narrated that the Prophet ﷺ came out to inform the believers the exact night of Laylatul Qadr. Right? The exact night of Laylatul Qadr. Imagine somebody coming and saying, right, Laylatul Qadr is the 27th night, for example. For sure, 100%. What's going to happen? What are you going to do on the 27th night? Oh, you're going to get your coffee going. Are you going to get your energy up? And you're going to spend every waking hour of that night doing everything you can. You're going to get as far as away from everybody as possible. You're going to make the best of it. Here, the Prophet ﷺ was coming out to inform the believers, the community, when Laylatul Qadr is. But there were two Muslims who were arguing. They were arguing with each other. This isn't discussion. This isn't a discussion. It's arguing. They're fighting with each other, right? And the Prophet says, I came out to tell you, but because so-and-so and so-and-so were fighting, that information was lifted. I forgot. Imagine how much barakah was lost because two Muslims were arguing within the community. Right? So when you see all the chaos in the Muslim world and the death and destruction, right? And you see also how Muslims are fighting with each other left and right. Every other year there's a coup somewhere. Every other year there's some sort of civil war, unrest. Families are at odds with each other, always fighting each other. You walk from the masjid to home, there's bound to be two people fighting. It's literally how it is, unfortunately. And you see all the problems. So a Muslim needs to be extremely conscious of the fact that the way they conduct themselves with one another is not simply a personal thing. It's not simply just between me and him. No, the barakah goes away. And if you're just to narrow this down to the family unit, when it's husband and wife who always argue with each other, you see the effect that has on the children. The barakah is lost. There's no barakah, you feel, or it seems, right? So we believers, we cannot be stubborn. We cannot be self-centered. We cannot be, the very extreme one-for-one mentality where, you have to do something for me in order for me to do something for you. And if you do something for me, I will reciprocate that exactly the way you gave it to me. Right? If you gave me $100 as a gift, I will only give you back 100. And they write the names of everybody, and they write the amount and the numbers. I mean, is fine, but is that the way we view our relationships? Honestly, I mean, is it that stubborn? Where's the ihsan? Where's the wanting good for other people? Right? لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحبه لنفسه. Where are people who are behaving on these principles? للأسف, I mean, very unfortunately, Iman is weak these days. And then the Prophet ﷺ, after saying that, I came to inform you, but it was lifted, he said, perhaps it's better. Right? Perhaps there's good in that. So while the Prophet ﷺ is disciplining the companions and teaching them, hey, you have to be careful, this stuff is serious, he also, he reacted to it with optimism. لعله خير. I mean, perhaps there's good in it. He didn't make the problem bigger. Right? He didn't come out and say, you did this, and now the entire community is lost this opportunity, and now everybody's mad at these two people, and it only makes the problem bigger. You see what I mean here? So the argument was between two. The Prophet ﷺ, in his wisdom, he contained it to those two people. If he reacted negatively, it would have spread. It would have become a bigger problem. But no, he contained it by saying a very optimistic statement that, perhaps it's better for us that we don't know exactly when it is. And then he said, alayhi salatu wasalam, seek it in the 27th, 29th, and the 25th nights. But remember, as we discussed in the previous hadith about Laylatul Qadr, what we understand from the Prophet's statement that it's either the 25th, 27th, or 29th, we understand from that in that particular year. In that particular year. Not every single year, but in that particular year. It's most likely, it's going to be in one of these 3 days. So he excluded the 23rd and 21st, that made their chances even better. Right? Now, what does this hadith, or how does this hadith relate to the title of the chapter? It relates in that, although the deeds weren't erased, they missed out on deeds. It wasn't their already acquired deeds that were erased, but future deeds or opportunities for more deeds was made difficult, was made, less guaranteed. And again, when we sin and we don't behave in our with Islamic etiquettes, then that closes doors of good. It closes doors of good. Treat people the way you want Allah to treat you. Allah will treat you the way you treat other people. This is the principle. And if you want Allah to treat you with His generosity, then be generous with people. If you want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to pardon your shortcomings, then pardon other people's shortcomings. If you want Allah to be merciful with you, then be merciful to others. If you want Allah to be compassionate with you, then be compassionate to others. If you want Allah to answer your dua, then answer people's needs. That's how it is. But this, again, 1-to-1 ratio, then that's how Allah is going to deal with you. Because that's how you're dealing with the creation. Right? Now, just to be clear, don't be naive. Don't be a pushover. Don't be a doormat. But learn to balance between, being a pushover and being somebody who is so rigid that there's no prospect of ihsan in a person's life. Right? So be moderate. باب سؤال جبريل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الإيمان والإسلام والإحسان. The chapter about Jibreel alayhi salam asking the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam about Iman and about Islam and about Ihsan. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يوما بارزا للناس فأتاه رجل فقال ما الإيمان؟ قال الإيمان أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وبلقائه ورسله وتؤمن بالبعث. قال ما الإسلام؟ قال الإسلام أن تعبد الله ولا تشرك به شيء ولا تشرك به وتقيم الصلاة وتؤدي الزكاة المفروضة وتصوم رمضان. قال ما الإحسان؟ قال أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. قال متى الساعة؟ قال ما المسؤول عنها بأعلم من السائل. So here, this is a very well-known hadith of Jibreel, where Jibreel alayhi salam comes in the form of a human, of a man, and sits with the Prophet in front of everybody. So there's an audience there. And he begins to ask the Prophet ﷺ a series of questions. The first question is, what is Iman? And the Prophet responded, Iman is to believe in Allah and His messengers and the angels and the books and meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he asked the Prophet ﷺ, what is Islam? He said, Islam is to worship Allah alone, not to worship other than Him, to establish salah, to give your zakah, and to fast Ramadan. Right? Hajj isn't mentioned here. Well, why not? This is an issue of variation in narrations. Right? I don't want to get into the details, but sometimes the companion narrating the hadith omits certain details or forgets certain details. But another companion who's narrating the same event or the same moment will remember them, right? But I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty details there. And then Jibril asked, what is ihsan? Ihsan, commonly translated as excellence, right? What is this? When is somebody's iman excellent? And the Prophet said, to worship Allah as though you see Him. Right? To worship Allah as though you see Him. But if you don't see Him, He sees you. Now there are two ways of understanding the second part. Either worship Allah as though you see Him. Right? But if you haven't reached that level to be so conscious of Allah, then at least know He sees you. Right? That's one way of understanding it. The second way of understanding it is worship Allah as though you see Him, because although you don't see Him, He sees you. Right? Either way, strong iman is dependent on your ability to be conscious of Allah, which is taqwa. Right? The more conscious you are of the fact that Allah is observing you, Allah is with you, Allah sees you, Allah is not blind or unaware of even the most minute details of your life, that He knows even what you think and what you feel, that is ihsan. Because when a person's consciousness or their level of consciousness of Allah is to that level, then how is that going to influence their decisions? How is that going to impact their behaviors? Oh, it's going to impact it tremendously. Because we human beings, when we know people are looking, we're polite. We follow the rules. But when people aren't looking, we're not going to follow the rules, right? So in the mind of a believer, Allah is always there. Allah always sees, right? So the more we can live by that, the more we can manifest this meaning, then inshallah, the stronger our iman will be, and the more we approach that level of ihsan that, is something we should all aspire towards. And then Jibril asked the Prophet ﷺ, when is the hour, meaning the day of judgment? When is this hour going to begin? And the Prophet's response is, مَا الْمَسْئُولُ عَنْهَا بِأَعْلَمَ مِنَ السَّائِلِ. The one who is asking, the one who is being asked does not have more information than the one who is asking. Right? I have no idea. The Prophet ﷺ does not know. Jibril ﷺ does not know. And then the Prophet said, وَسَأُخْبِرُكَ عَنْ أَشْرَاطِهَا. I will give you information about its signs. So we know in Islam, there are signs of the Day of Judgment. There are signs of the Day of Judgment, right? And there are many signs. Some have already happened, some are happening, some have yet to happen. But what is the purpose of the signs? Why is there even such a thing as the signs of the Day of Judgment? In the end, we're not going to know exactly when it is. And more likely than not, we will die before the Day of Judgment even begins. Right? We will have already passed away. So what's the wisdom behind informing us about the signs? And I think there are three primary wisdoms. One, it serves as evidence that the Prophet is a prophet of Allah. Because these are prophecies that a person needs to know the future in order to know. And since Allah is the only one who knows the future, then the fact that the Prophet ﷺ has given us dozens of signs of the Day of Judgment that have come to light, we cannot but conclude what? That he is a prophet. Right? So that's one wisdom. It's an evidence that he's a prophet ﷺ. The second wisdom is that we human beings are very interested in this type of stuff. What's going to happen in the future? What's going to be going on? And these predictions, it attracts us. And so when you have a series about the signs of the Day of Judgment, it gets a large audience. People find it interesting. And so by having this, it arouses the interest of people, but it arouses their interest on a topic the religion wants you to think about a lot. And that is what? The afterlife. So the signs of the Day of Judgment keep Muslims constantly talking about the Day of Judgment, constantly thinking about the Day of Judgment. That's the second wisdom. The third wisdom is that a lot of these signs tend to happen in times of great difficulty. In times of great difficulty. So when we see that the Prophet ﷺ has spoken about this, it helps the believer who was in those times be more patient. The Prophet said this will happen. Okay, let me be patient. It gives them this feel that, okay, things are going according to plan, so to speak. Even though it's crazy, it's still going according to plan. One prophecy of the Prophet ﷺ is that yushaku an yakuna afdal ribat asqalan. The Prophet ﷺ says, a time is approaching where the best ribat is securing the borders. Those who are working to secure the borders of the ummah, to protect the borders from invaders, right? He says, a time is approaching where the best ribat will be in the town of Asqalan. Where's Asqalan?
Is it in Palestine?
It's in what's now called Gaza. Palestine, right? This area, specifically Gaza. So the scholars have said that the Prophet is talking about what's going on now. So when you see the Palestinians' willingness or their lack of willingness to leave their land. Let's be honest. If this was happening in any other part of the Muslim world, those people would leave. Naturally. As has happened before. When the Mongols would invade certain places, or the Crusaders, the Muslims would run, they would leave. Right? Entire villages would go and live elsewhere. Obviously. But these Palestinians are so stubborn. I mean, even the terrorist Israelis are saying, the Israeli government, what are they saying? It's like, why won't you just leave? No, we won't leave. This is my land. I won't leave. That's coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is Allah putting that steadfastness in their hearts to not leave. And for Allah is a wisdom in that, right? So imagine, somebody living in Gaza coming across this hadith. The Prophet is talking about them, talking about me. And he's saying that, we're doing the best thing that a person can be doing on this earth today, right? And calling it ribat. And the Prophet ﷺ in other hadith says that every person's deeds, their book of deeds, concludes at their death, except the one who did the ribat. Their deeds keep coming, even after death. Tremendous reward. So, those who are going through that difficulty, to them, hearing this is what? It's incredibly inspirational. The Prophet is talking about me, right? It's tremendous. So these are three wisdoms. Perhaps there are more than that. But in this particular hadith, the Prophet ﷺ identifies two signs of the hour. One, إِذَا وَلَدَتِ الْأَمَةُ رَبَّهَا. When a woman gives birth to her master. When women give birth to their master. And scholars differed over what this means. Some contemporary scholars said that this is referring to kids being so spoiled that they control their parents. It's as though the kids are in control, like they're the masters, and the parents are just following and doing whatever they want. It happens, right? Other scholars said that this is referring to when back in the time of slavery, the princes and the sultans and whatnot, they would have, their slave girls, their slave women, their concubines, and they would give birth. They would have children of these sultans and these emirs, some of whom would become, generals of armies and sultans and khulafa. Right? A lot of khulafa are actually their mothers are the concubines, right? So technically, who's the master? The child is the master of the mother. That's one possibility as well. Allahu alam. But this most likely has already happened. The other sign, وَإِذَا تَطَاوَلَ عُرَاةُ الْإِبْلِ الْبُهْمُ فِي الْبُنْيَانِ. When the Bedouins, the unclothed Bedouins, when the shepherds of camels begin to compete in buildings, right? Which is the Gulf today, right? Which is the Gulf today. They're competing in buildings. Dubai the Emirates made the tallest building in the world. Now Saudi Arabia wants to make the tallest building in the world. They're competing in the bunyan. Now, one of the mistakes that people make when understanding the signs of the Day of Judgment, they think that if something is a sign of the Day of Judgment, it means it's something that's negative and bad. That's not necessarily the case. Just because competing in buildings is a sign of the Day of Judgment does not make buildings and what they are doing or those people doing it as inherently evil. Right? Forget about everything else for a moment. I'm just talking about particularly this. Love them, hate them, I don't care. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about specifically that they are doing this. This hadith is not telling us they're evil people because they're doing this, or that this is a sign that they're evil people. It is a common misinterpretation. If they are evil, it's for other reasons. Right? Same thing on the other side. If they are good, it's not because of this. Just because the Prophet referenced this does not give them inherent morality, or does not make them better believers. If they're good, it's because of something else. And I want to make this clear because people misunderstand this. And then the hadith continues, في خمس لا يعلمهن إلا الله ثم تلا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله عنده علم الساعة وينزل الغيث ويعلم ما في الأرحام وما تدري نفس ماذا تكسب غدا وما تدري نفس بأي أرض تموت. There are 5 things that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. Right? Nobody else knows this. 1, إن الله عنده علم الساعة. Allah knows when the hour is, the Day of Judgment begins. وَيُنَزِّلُ الْغَيْثِ. Allah knows where it will rain. It's been crazy these past few days, right? Here. I look at the weather, there's no rain. Nothing. And all of a sudden you get this what is it? I'm guessing it's a monsoon from the desert area, right? Because that's not SoCal weather. That's desert weather. The hail and the thunder, it's crazy, right? All of a sudden, وَيُنَزِّلُ الْغَيْثِ. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He sends down rain. Inshallah, it's barakah. بِإِذْنِ ta'ala. وَيَعْلَمُ مَا فِي الْأَرْحَامِ. Allah knows what is in the womb of a mother. Male, female, all the details of that child's life, how it will look, etc. Now, a person might think, well, we have ultrasound now, we can know. Well, Allah knows before that. You don't know if it's a male or a female until a certain period of time. Allah knows exactly at the point before it's even conceived, right? Subhanahu. وَمَا تَدْرِي نَفْسٌ مَاذَا تَكْسِبُ غَدًا. The 4th, nobody knows what they will earn tomorrow. You have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. You could have a plan, you could have everything, but you really don't know. وَمَا تَدْرِي نَفْسٌ بِأَيِّ أَرْضٍ تَمُوتُ. And nobody knows what land they will die on. Right? People have died in very bizarre places they never expected that they will die. Right? ثم أدبر, and then Jibreel alayhi salam left. فقال ردوه فلم يروا شيئا فقال هذا جبريل جاء يعلم الناس دينهم. All right. And then Jibreel left. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam told them, call him back. They went to look for him. Nobody's there. Gone. And then the Prophet said, that is Jibreel. he came to teach you your religion. Why did the Prophet ﷺ tell them to go and call him back? So that they see it with their own two eyes, that, wait a minute, he just disappeared. The Prophet knows this is Jibreel, right? But he wants them to know that this is Jibreel, instead of him just saying. He wants it to be realized by them through more than just what he said. If he said it, they would believe. I mean, these are companions of Allah Ta'ala anhum. But seeing it is definitely more interesting. Allahu Ta'ala alam. Let's go ahead and stop there. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in.